How many of you know the name Helen Keller? Okay. How many of you know the name Annie Sullivan? Okay. For the rest of you less literate people, let me explain this, okay? All right. Helen Keller, who was born in 1880 and lived to 1968, was deaf and blind, almost a feral child, resulting from an illness that she suffered when she was 19 months old. Annie Sullivan was her teacher. I think she was 20 years old when she was employed by the family. And she taught her how to communicate by spelling words in Helen's hands. Helen Keller learned to communicate. She earned a college degree and became a world-famous author, political activist, and lecturer. There was a Broadway play in 1962 and then a movie based on the play that were written about Helen's transformation. You know the name of the play? The Miracle Worker. Annie Sullivan was the miracle worker. Now, today's gospel tells the well-known story of what has become known as the multiplication of the loaves and fishes, a miraculous story of a pretty nifty trick on the part of Jesus. Other than the resurrection, this story is the only miracle found in all four Gospels. In fact, this story is found 6 times in the Gospels. Once in Luke, once in John, twice in Matthew, and twice in Mark. And the usual number of fishes in the stories is 2, loaves is 5, number of baskets left over is 12, and the number of people fed is 5,000 men. They didn't count the women and children because of their small appetites, I'm thinking. So in the second telling of the story in Matthew and Mark, there doesn't say 2 fishes, it says a few fish, 7 loaves instead of 5, 7 baskets, and 4,000 people. Now, I did the math, and the average is 2 fish, give or take, 5.66 loaves, 10.33 leftover baskets, and 4,666.6 men fed. Only at the CSC do you get the facts. Okay. So, what's the deal with this miracle? As a matter of fact, what's the deal with miracles in general? Let's look at that first. What is a miracle? Is it something supernatural? Something beyond what is natural? Is a miracle something above and beyond what is normal? Is a miracle then akin to something magic? Now, I had a truly gifted scripture teacher in my freshman year in Rockhurst College in Kansas City in 1963. And he went on to teach at Cardinal Stritch University in Milwaukee for 50 years. And he authored many, many books on Scripture. So I owe him a tremendous debt. Much of what I learned about miracles, I learned from him, and I give him due credit. Now here's a brief and modest summary of what my friend and mentor teaches. Let's start with the healing miracles. The Gospels agree that Jesus enjoyed extraordinary success at healing people in God's name. There are many stories, and they are deemed reliable. Modern scholarship believes that genuine miracles occur, and that God truly healed people through Jesus to endorse his kingdom message. And God continues to heal people miraculously in our age. But modern scholarship generally agrees that genuine miracles do not contradict the laws of nature. Now, our God-given reason tells us it's wrong for us to act illogically, contradictorily, or uneconomically. And we can conclude, therefore, that God does not act in illogical, contradictory, or uneconomical ways. God does not contradict the very laws of nature that God is everywhere and always creating and upholding. Secondly, any explanation of a miracle should adhere to what's called the law of parsimony in philosophy. It states that hypothetical entities should never be multiplied beyond what is necessary. And what that means is that the hypothesis with the fewest assumptions is preferred over that which has many assumptions. Now, the only place in nature where God can act without influencing without interfering is in the human spirit that can freely open itself to divine influence. Note that I say influence, not control. God is not interfering with or violating nature when God's action is freely invited or consciously sought. Now, you'll recall, if you think about it, the miraculous healings that Jesus brought about, there was always either a free request or a hope of healing. Jesus never mediated God's healing power on an unwilling person. That would be disrespecting that person's freedom. The healing mediated by Jesus was not supernatural, it was not abnormal, but it was paranormal. A healing that is paranormal is one in which some latent therapeutic potentiality in the healing person's own nature is activated and accelerated. Let me say that again, because this is important. A healing that is paranormal is one in which some latent therapeutic potentiality in the healed person's own nature is activated and accelerated. Now, let me give you an example of a miracle, to me at least, being something paranormal, something that does not contradict the laws of nature, something that is activated or accelerated inside of a person, something that's innate and intrinsic to the person. Now, you've probably heard of the term miracle drug. And the dictionary defines miracle drug as, quote, a drug usually newly discovered that elicits a dramatic response in a patient's condition. Now, in 1928, Alexander Fleming observed that Staphylococcus germs failed to grow in a culture contaminated by penicillium. And this ultimately led to the development of injectable penicillin in 1941, a drug that saved countless lives of people who would otherwise have died from infection. A truly miracle drug. Now, the operant word in the definition of a miracle drug is elicit. Penicillin does not create, it rather elicits. In other words, it activates and accelerates the body's natural and innate healing power. It's a paranormal phenomenon. Now, that we have this complex explanation fully and completely understood by all, okay? I'm not going to repeat it, one time only. Let's turn to the miracle of the multiplication of loaves and fishes. Contemporary biblical scholarship tells us that we should take this story seriously, but not literally. I think most of us are aware that there are multiple meanings and multiple explanations for miracle stories, including this one. And we don't have time to go into all of that. Jesus is presented in this story as the new Moses who feeds his people not life-sustaining manna in the desert, but the true bread of life come down from heaven that sustains us eternally. And in the multiplication of the bread and fish story, fish was added later, probably was meant to remind those who had heard this story of the post-resurrection appearances of Jesus, and you can read in that, Luke 24, in which, remember, the disciples ate the broiled fish on the shore, okay? And then they saw the risen Lord. And numerology was a very important literary device in the ancient world. The numbers in this story were clearly intended to evoke memories on the part of the hearers, okay? For example, the numbers 5 and 5,000 were meant to evoke the memory of Paul's writings that Jesus appeared first to Peter, then to the 12, and then to 500. The early gospel writer probably chose 5,000 rather than 500 to image Moses feeding the multitude in the desert. See, there's all these connections, okay? And in the Acts of the Apostles, in chapter 4, you see Luke using the term 5,000 to describe the rapid growth of the church. So these numbers had meaning to the people who heard them. The number 12 clearly images the 12 tribes and the 12 apostles, and the number 7 has always been understood as a sign of wholeness and completion. Like in the world was created in 7 days, 6 to work and 1 to rest, okay? But the real and more important question for those who heard Jesus 2,000 years ago, and for us who hear him now, is this. So what does this mean and why does it matter? If the story is just about a magical occurrence, it means nothing. It's only entertainment, no more impactful than seeing a fun movie that does nothing to change us after we leave the show. If it's about a miracle, then it's about transformation. And transformation is not magic. Transformation is about real, palpable, observable change for the good. And in our recognition that magic is not real, whereas miracles are, we realize this because magic would contradict God's natural laws, while miracles do not contradict God's natural laws. Miracles are real, and they lead to transformation for the good of all. Are there magical solutions to the problems of the world? Apparently not. Could there be miraculous solutions to the problems of the world? Yes, there could. But only through the transformation of our spirit, in which we in freedom hear and respond to the will of God that inspires women and men to perform natural miracles. Consider these problems of the world and imagine, as the John Lennon song does in the song by the same name, if it is possible that there could be miraculous solutions to these problems. Malnutrition and starvation, lack of life-giving clean water and clean air, racism, sexism, classism, the modern-day slavery of exploited workers, many of whom are women and children, poverty, lives that could be saved through medicines and medical procedures that are presently available mostly to the privileged few, the slaughter of innocents due to gun violence, the indifference of those who migrate from countries where children are raped, murdered, or forced to join gangs. Let's return to the miracle drug penicillin. Alexander Fleming and those scientists who built on his discovery of something already present in nature performed a miracle. I believe that God gave humans the ability through evolution, through trial and error, over centuries, to ultimately unlock the secrets of nature and come up with this miracle drug. But that miracle is incomplete. If penicillin had only been kept for his own use, Fleming's miraculous discovery would be small and puny. But it was made available to many, and that is miraculous. What would be even more miraculous would be the transformation of the human spirit so that penicillin and all life-giving medicines and discoveries would be made available to all without exception. Can't we take a lesson from this story of the multiplication of the loaves and fishes in which all are fed and there's still plenty left over? There's a message there. The real message of this miracle story is that God desires that we do seemingly the impossible to assure that no one goes hungry, both in terms of their bodies and their spirits. God desires that we do all we can to feed the hungry, to feed those who hunger in their bodies and in their spirits, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, as well as those whose bellies are empty. In the story, Jesus did not instruct the disciples to pass out the bread and fish only to those who proved themselves worthy of assistance, nor only to those who passed the test for inclusion in his group. He fed everyone, and so should we. God enabled Annie Sullivan to become the miracle worker. God enabled Alexander Fleming to discover a miracle drug. God enabled Jesus of Nazareth to perform the miracles that he proclaimed in the kingdom message. What miracles will God enable someone to perform today and tomorrow? So in faith and trust, we await that answer.